Good morning and welcome. We'll begin the program in just a minute. Please make sure that you have pen and paper in front of you to take notes, to jot down any questions or reminders for yourself that you might have during this program. We're excited to have you here, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right, we'll get started. Good morning. Welcome to the Early Memory Loss Conference hosted by Alzheimer's Los Angeles in partnership with Cedars-Sinai. My name is Alicia Villegas. I'm the Director of Early Stage Services and Latino Services at Alzheimer's Los Angeles. And it's an honor to be here with you to welcome you to this virtual event. If you are here to gain insight, information, and inspiration into this important issue that has touched your life, I believe you won't be disappointed. We have a great conference planned for you filled with information from experts in the field, courageous people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia, who will share their stories with you, and we will be able to share resources to help guide you once the conference is over. In my work at Alzheimer's Los Angeles, I see and hear stories that touch the heart and speak to the best part of all of us. I hope the information and the experiences that we share with you today will help warm your heart, inform your life, and empower you with the hope and courage to face the challenges of tomorrow. Throughout the conference, you'll be muted to help decrease background noise and help us all hear this valuable information as clearly as possible. If you have questions at any time during the conference, we will be taking questions in the following way. You can type your question at any time during the conference by clicking on the Q&A button below. It should appear at the bottom of your screen. My colleague Tori will be helping to answer your questions directly or privately, depending on your question. If your question is not answered today, you can share your contact information with us in the post-evaluation that will be shared with you after the conference has concluded, and we will help connect you and get your question answered. We have scheduled breaks, so you have time to go get to the bathroom, stretch, refill your cup of coffee or tea, or grab some snacks, whatever it is that you need. And I do encourage you to have pen and paper with you to jot down any notes or questions. Now, I'd like to introduce Heather Cooper-Ortner. Ms. Cooper-Ortner serves as our president and CEO at Alzheimer's Los Angeles, whose mission is to improve the lives of local families affected by Alzheimer's disease or related dementias by increasing awareness, delivering effective programs and services, providing compassionate support, and advocating for quality care and a cure. Heather, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Alicia. I hope you all can hear me. I'm very, very excited to be here this morning. Good morning and welcome to you all. Thank you all for joining us today, and special thanks to our partner, Cedars-Sinai. Additional special thanks to the whole Alzheimer's LA staff and our wonderful speakers for helping everything go so smoothly and for working tirelessly to bring this event to you today. Special thanks to you, Alicia Villegas, our Director of Early Stage Services, who you just heard from, and to Carmine Tawagan, our Development Manager. Carmine and Alicia have worked so hard over the last few months to make today a success, and we are so grateful for all of their hard work and their diligence. You will not be disappointed. It is going to be a great and informative program for you all. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Elliot and Marcia Sainer, who graciously provided the funding and are joining us today. We are so grateful for Elliot and Marcia's continued support of Alzheimer's Los Angeles and our early stage programs. They, along with so many others, help make sure that no family is ever charged for the services they receive from Alzheimer's Los Angeles. And thank you to those of you in the audience who contributed. We had a passive ask if you wanted to donate, and we've been overwhelmed by the outpouring of support for our mission from you all. And so far we've raised almost about $770, which is really quite amazing and wonderful. So thank you all for that. Alzheimer's Los Angeles recognizes that people dealing with memory concerns feel frustrated, alone, frightened, and probably so many other emotions. This conference has been created after years of listening to and learning from the advice of people with memory loss and early stage Alzheimer's disease. Our first memory loss conference, excuse me, our first memory loss conference was held in 2007, and we've evolved over the years. We've developed and refined our models of care to meet the needs of people with memory loss and their care partners. Today, we're thrilled to provide this important program to you virtually. And while we cannot be together in person, I am certain you will find the experience enriching and rewarding. I want to be sure you all know about one of our other programs for people with mild cognitive impairment or early stage dementia. The Memory Club is an award-winning program designed to offer information and support in a safe, supportive environment, and it's tailored for people with Alzheimer's and with early stage Alzheimer's and their care partners. They share stories with others going through similar experiences, build bonds, and learn together. Many people who have participated in it say that it's life-changing. And if you enjoy today's program, I encourage you to reach out to us if you're interested in our special groups for people with early stage dementia, or if you'd like to meet with one and talk with one of our care counselors, including Tori, who will also be answering some of your questions here today. I hope you will all find the information that is about to be shared with you today helpful and informative, and feel free to ask your questions. One of the great things about this event, usually in person, is the opportunity to be interactive and to ask questions. And our speakers are always so generous with their time and do their best to answer all of your questions. So it is my pleasure to bring back Alicia now, and for her to introduce our first speaker. And I will be here all day, and we'll also be watching the chat. So if you have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to ask. But enjoy the day, enjoy the program, and ask. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you, Heather, for sharing about Alzheimer's LA's mission and impact, and reminding people that, yes, we want this to be interactive. So submit your questions. And so I'm going to review that process again to submit your questions. Should you have any, at any time during the presentation, you can click on the Q&A tab. My colleague Tori will help answer your questions directly, or she will hold on to your question so that we can ask the expert at the Q&A portion of our presentation. If your questions are not answered today, you can share your contact information with us in the post-evaluation that will be shared with you. And after the conference has concluded, we're going to help connect you and get your question answered. I would like to now introduce Rebecca Goldfarb, Estate Planning and Elder Law Attorney at Goldfarb & Lew. Ms. Goldfarb co-founded Goldfarb & Lew on the principle that quality estate plans should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. Having been a caregiver for 7 people in her life, including her grandfather who had Alzheimer's, elder law is dear to her heart. She treats each client as family and helps families navigate the aging process. Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us and sharing this important and very valuable information.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here, even though it's such an odd format. I am so used to being live where we get to see faces and give hugs and all of that. So I can't wait for this to be over.
Definitely.
So thank you all so much. And I'm happy to go through my presentation. Usually there's a long line of people afterwards with questions. And so please feel free to ask your questions the way Alicia suggested. And I will make time after the conference in the following week or two to address your questions. So anyway, my name is Rebecca, and I'm an estate an elder law attorney, and my law partner and I founded the firm in 2008 with the mindset of really simplifying and making estate planning kind of user-friendly. Elder law was a natural progression since as Alicia said, my grandpa had Alzheimer's. I had a grandpa with cancer, brain tumor, and then my grandma had a stroke, and 2 great aunts and my mother-in-law also with cancer. So not including my parents, it's been 7 people so far. I guess that's the other side of being the only grandchild and young person in the family. So anyway, please flip to the next slide. It's so weird that I don't control the slides. So many people might think, what is an estate plan? So I wanted to at least address that at the very beginning. So an estate plan is a set of documents that together should, and I have that in red because oftentimes we see that it doesn't work, should honor your wishes, avoid court, and maintain family harmony. I think that if you have no kids or you have only 1 kid, those of us who are only children, we have no one to fight with. So there's not a family harmony issue usually there, but honoring your wishes is really important, and obviously avoiding the expense, emotional toll and all of that time of court is important. Next slide. So estate planning 101, there are 4 main documents and then some additional documents that make up a comprehensive estate plan. So the first one is the Advanced Healthcare Directive. This is where the person has legal authority to make healthcare decisions for you. And it also is the living will component of that. It should include all of your wishes, and this should be very detailed. I'm going to go over this in more detail in a few slides. And the power of attorney is for everything else. So it's for paying bills, dealing with taxes, signing contracts, acting on the person's behalf in a legal capacity. So those 2 documents, we call that the baby estate plan, and that should be done by everyone over 18. So this is not saved until you're older or saved until something happens. Once you lose capacity mentally, you cannot create any of these documents. So it's very important that everyone do this as soon as possible. I don't have a slide for this, but I should, but I guess it wouldn't work because you can't click the link. Anyway, I'm sort of talking out loud to myself. But if you want these statutory versions of these documents that are the free versions that our House and Senate have created, then if you email through, ask through Alicia, we can send that to you so that at least you will have those documents, and they're just fill in the blanks. The power of attorney is notarized. The advance directive is witnessed by 2 independent people not included in the document. Okay, I think if you hit next, some things pop up. So if you're over 18, you need those 2 documents. Those are what avoids conservatorship in most cases. There are exceptions as to why we might still have to go through conservatorship, but those are the main documents to avoid that. So on the other side is your trust and will. And essentially, if you have some assets or you have kids, then you probably need a trust. A will goes through probate. So if we want to avoid probate, the will doesn't really help us. But you have to have over $166,250 to trigger probate. So if you have less than that, or you have your assets with beneficiary designations, then the will might be okay. But if you have a home and you have kids or grandkids, minor people who might end up receiving something after you die, then a trust is very important. California has a very expensive probate process, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, next slide. So these are the polling questions. I don't really know how to do this. Hopefully it works on your end. So I'm wondering for those of you watching, do you have an estate plan as I described above? And if so, have you updated it in the last few years? These documents are not meant to just be static. They should grow with you as you grow and change. And then if you don't have a comprehensive estate plan, based on what I said, do you think you need one? So I'm just wondering what people think about that. And so if you could fill out, just click on the answers that represent you. You might have to scroll down in the poll, and then we'll give you like a minute to do that. And then I'm so curious, so I'm going to write it down. See, when we're live, I get to see hands that go up, but this is our version of that. Okay, how about we see who responded or how people responded? So EP, 67% of you, awesome. And then for those of you, if you should update it, think about it very, very carefully, especially after hearing everything today. And I'm just going to scroll down myself. And then those of you who don't have one, 80% of you think that you should have one. Excellent. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. That's always so interesting to me. Can we move to the next slide? Oh, there we go. So I will say, even though this is a startling number, that we have extremely high expectations. As I said, it should honor your wishes, avoid court, and maintain family harmony. You'd think that would be the normal standard, but apparently it's not, because 95% of the plans we see have a fatal flaw in one of those areas. Usually the client is unaware of it. Next slide. So I don't have time today, unfortunately, to go over all of the details of the advance directive, but to me, this is the most important document that we have in an estate plan, because you are relying on someone else to know all of your wishes and be able to honor them and execute them when you are incapacitated. So we go through tons of details to figure out the most important things. So today I'm just going to focus on some of the fatal flaws that we see in each of these documents. We're changing it a little bit from past presentations. So next slide. So mostly what we see is that people have picked the wrong people in this job. Sometimes it is that there are co-agents, and it's because usually people can't pick between their kids. So if you are picking co-agents, they better work together seamlessly, even in high times of stress. They need to respond emotionally and process grief and stress the same way, and they need to be active participants in the same way. So you can't have someone who's like really active and someone who's kind of lagging behind. You really need to work as a team. So I usually, unless in our documents, we have a way to break a tie, but in most of the documents we see that doesn't exist. So springing powers, this means if you are relying on doctors to deem you incapacitated in your documents, that is what a springing power is. I don't like those. I like immediately effective, because doctors don't like to get involved in capacity determinations. It's very important to have a HIPAA waiver. That's the Privacy Act. We see missing documents in this regard all the time. The CMIA is the California version of that Privacy Act. All of them that we see don't have any details. So that's pretty much universal. And then if you feel like you do not want to be resuscitated, you need a POLST. And so next slide, please. This is a POLST. It's the physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment. This can be created by you as the individual or by your agent at any time, even if you no longer have capacity. So it's very important to go through this document carefully with your doctor or someone who's been trained in the POLST document. So next slide. So with the durable power of attorney, remember, this is if you are incapacitated and someone needs to pay the bills, deal with taxes, fix a beneficiary designation, all sorts of things come up for the power of attorney. So a lot of people pick the wrong people for this. If you pick someone who's a procrastinator or who is a little bit in financial need, this can be a very difficult job for this person. I never want co-agents in this document because some financial institutions will not accept it. So it's important that it's one and then another. Springing powers is the same thing. We want these immediately effective, but do not give this document to your power of attorney. In fact, I say don't give any of the documents to your next in line. Obviously, if it's your spouse, that's fine. But if it's the next people after that, because you may change it, and we don't want all these, old documents floating around. And then many durable powers of attorney do not allow gifting. This has to be specifically enumerated in the document, and if it's not, you can't do it, which means that when we get to Medi-Cal planning, it can't be done if you've lost capacity. Next slide. So conservatorship is if you don't have an advance directive, you don't have a power of attorney, you've lost capacity, then you have to go to court. This is the judge is deciding who takes care of you and handles your finances. They may, he or she may take away your voting or driving privileges. And then it's very expensive. It's about $10,000 to start and about $5,000 every year thereafter, because you have to supply a court accounting or an annual accounting of all the money for the conservatee that has been spent on the conservatee. So we like to avoid this if at all possible. Next slide. So a lot of the issues that come up, we get a lot of people who call us about conservatorships because they don't have these documents and the person has already lost capacity. And this breaks our heart because then it's sort of the only route. But the problem is this capacity declaration. So sometimes we can't get it. Sometimes we can't get the person to see a doctor, or sometimes you can't find a doctor to do it, or sometimes it's very expensive. Sometimes you're just sort of on the border, right? You might not be making great decisions. There could be things that are, elder abuse scams and things like that are happening, but the person still has some capacity, and so it's not ripe for conservatorship yet. Then the issue is who will serve as the conservator. Some people fight over this. The probate code lists an order for this, so we have to go down that order. And if the conservatee refuses, then this is essentially litigation, and it's like a mini trial in court. So there is a court-appointed counsel for, so it's a court-appointed attorney for the conservatee and an investigator. These people are instrumental, and they're either great to work with or really hard to work with. So for example, we represent the person who wants to be the conservator, but then once you're deemed incapacitated, the person who doesn't have capacity gets their own support system, essentially. And sometimes these people are great and sometimes they're really difficult. And as I mentioned, it's really expensive. So all I can say is, as soon as possible, fill out those advance directives and powers of attorney. Next slide. So whether you need a will or a trust, I kind of touched upon before. For a will, if you have under $166,250, and you have your assets with very up-to-date beneficiary designations, that's fine. Anything in a will is given outright. And so if you want the person to get whatever it is outright, that's fine. If it goes through probate or it's a beneficiary designation, and you shouldn't have minor kids and do a will, because then everything goes to them at 18. And so a trust is really if you have real estate, because we want to avoid the probate fees and that time. And then also if you want to sprinkle assets over time, and if you have kids and grandkids, it's ideal. Okay, next slide. So probate is if you have no will or a will, you have over 166,000 that don't have beneficiaries or transfer on deaths, you're headed to probate. It's a public process. We have to notify 2 layers of next of kin. The judge decides whether the will is valid or not. If not, or if there is no will, it follows the law of intestacy, which means it's going to your next of kin in a particular order, even if you don't want it to. The person you name as the executor may or may not become the executor because they have to qualify for a bond usually, which is an insurance product that they don't run away. If they run away with all the assets, the estate is covered. So some people can't qualify that. Super expensive, which I'll talk about in a minute. The assets are frozen for months. So as a surviving spouse, this can be extraordinarily difficult. We have to notify all creditors. And it's about a 1+ year process. So a trust is administered completely privately and doesn't go through all of that. Next slide. So what will probate cost? So essentially, just look in column 1, pick out, let's just say $700,000. And oh, by the way, if you have a home, even if you have a mortgage, you don't get to subtract the mortgage from the gross value of your estate. So it's fair market value of your home. So let's just say it's $700,000 of all of your assets, including your home. Then the probate fees would be $34,000 minimum. The lawyer gets half and the executor gets half. So if you have a trust, obviously there's no probate fees. And this just keeps going up. It's a formula, so it just keeps going up no matter how large your estate is. Next slide. So fatal flaws that we see in trusts. Successor trustees are not well thought out. Maybe they're the wrong ones. Maybe they have co-trustees. I very rarely will let our clients have co-trustees. Or sometimes there's no trustee listed, and the trust doesn't have a mechanism to name a new trustee, and we have to go to court. So this is happening with one of our clients right now. And so we have what's called a trust protector in all of our trusts so that we can avoid court in those ways. The funding is incomplete. This means that when you have a trust and you've signed it, it's very important that you, after you're done with it, fund your trust. You retitle your assets. The deed gets redone and re-recorded, and it is no longer you as the owner, it is you as the trustee of your trust as the owner. Your beneficiary designations get updated, other accounts get updated. If you have more than $166,000 outside of that trust, it's going to trigger us to go to court, even if you have a trust. So I cannot emphasize that enough. Please fund your trust. We tell our clients that when you are done with your documents, you are not done with your estate plan. You must go through the funding phase. And then when you're done with the funding phase, then you're done with your trust, with your estate plan. We see a lot of mandatory AB splits, probably once a week or so. So this means, and the lawyer, I just spoke to someone yesterday, the lawyer never talked about this. People don't understand it because it's written in gobbledygook language for most of us. So this mandatory split means that when you pass away, 2 new trusts are born. The decedent's share is irrevocable. You do not have as much access to that money as you think you do. So if you've been together a long time, you don't have a blended family, or sometimes even if you do, you probably don't want a mandatory AB split, and you want that fixed before it's too late. I'm working with 3 clients right now where this is very, very difficult. The trust protector I mentioned, so we very rarely see trust protectors in our trusts that we review, and these people can be lifesavers to avoid a lot of court expenses. And if the trustee is doing something wrong, that trust protector can make him or her do it right. Next slide. So I don't have enough time to go through all of the things in all of the detail as I want to. So we want to make sure in our estate plans that there's enough to administer the estate. Sometimes people will have everything by a beneficiary designation. So they try to avoid doing a trust, or they do a trust, but they still have so many specific gifts in the trust. And that means that we don't have enough money to administer the estate. We can't pay final expenses. We can't pay final tax returns. You can't pay the trust attorney or the trust administration attorney to help administer it. And there are very important things as trustee that you need to have a lawyer protect you so that nothing comes back to bite you later. And then another big issue that comes up is control over assets. So it depends what hat you're wearing. You know, I had that visual early in the presentation about the 4 different quadrants. And so you are wearing a different hat each time you are handling the affairs in that quadrant. So if you are wearing your durable power of attorney hat, it means that the asset is in the person's name. If you are wearing your trustee hat, it means that the asset is in the trust's name. So when someone begins to lose capacity, the idea is the successor trustee handling this, or is the durable power of attorney handling this? And so it depends who the owner of the asset is. And so if the power of attorney is immediate, then you just seamlessly step in. No successor trustee is an immediate power. And so that means that you have to go through the process to deem someone incapacitated. But it offers different protections, because then when you pass away, it's going to run through the trust, right? So there's benefits of both, and we evaluate all the assets for our clients to make sure that that it's properly funded and it makes sense. So ease of access, kind of the same thing. The unintended consequences of adding a child to an account or a deed. I'm going to say this about 2 or 3 times. If you add your kid to your deed, first of all, now that Prop 19 has passed, if you add your kid as a 50% owner, 50% of your property taxes will be the 50% of the value of your estate will be reassessed for property taxes, unless it's your primary residence and your kid's primary residence, with a couple other caveats. But it also means that depending upon how you hold title, it's automatically going to that particular person. So if you have other kids, this could present an issue. It also may impact capital gains and step up in basis. Well, we still have that. If you add your kid to a deed, or a friend, or a cousin, or whomever, to an account, if you add someone on an account. So if I have a bank account and it says Rebecca Goldfarb, and I add, Din Lu, my best friend and law partner, she owns that money with me. It means that at any moment in time, she could just take that money and it's hers, and it's totally legal, even though it was mine. It also means if she gets in a car accident, that personal injury attorney is going after that money because he or she thinks it's the other person's, even though it's mine. So people do this because they think, oh, it's just going to make it easier. The power of attorney handles this perfectly fine. So there is no need to ever add someone as a joint owner to your assets. So I have tons more I could talk about, but I know at some point I'm going to be given you don't have any more time. All right, so I'm going to be given my warning. Next slide. So let's take a very short sneak peek into long-term care planning. Many of you already know this, but in case you don't, the cost of care for long-term care, meaning you need someone to help at home, private caregiver, if you don't go through an agency, is about $130,000 a year if you follow the employment laws. This is for 24-hour care. If you go through an agency, it's about $240,000. So it's very expensive. In communities, if you move to a community, it's a little bit less, let's say, $50,000 to $100,000. And if you're in a residential care home, it's less expensive, let's say, $35,000 to $60,000. So some of you here, it might be untenable to get long-term care insurance, but if you're younger, or you could talk to other family people, I always say it's worth checking out long-term care insurance, because it is what will help defray these costs. Medi-Cal will help, but you have to be eligible for Medi-Cal. So that means if you're an individual, you have $2,000 to your name, plus a house, your car, and your personal property. There are ways to get you qualified for Medi-Cal. That's what elder law attorneys help with. Medicare does not handle any of the expenses of long-term care unless it is after a 3-day visit at the hospital. So if you stay in a hospital for 3 days and you're in rehab, then you get up to 100 days that Medicare will pay for that long-term care rehab. But if you're not progressing, they will just cut you off and say, okay, we're discharging you. So Medi-Cal, just to go into a few more details, there are different parts of Medi-Cal. So one is, and I always say this at the very beginning when people call us, I created a very short Medi-Cal video. I think it's like 5 minutes or so to go over this. So if anyone's interested and you just want the video that spends more time on Medi-Cal, Jessica at our office can send that to you. So quality of care is important because sometimes we get people where they really do have money, but they want to, savor it and have it last as long as possible. So they want to qualify for Medi-Cal. But then when they go visit the communities that have Medi-Cal beds, then they say it's sort of changed their mind. So eligibility, like I said, is $2,000 to your name as the applicant. If you, and then you can have a home and you can have your a car and personal property. You can also have retirement as long as you're taking your RMDs, required minimum distributions. And then if you're a couple and you're applying together, you can have $3,000 altogether, plus the house and the other things I mentioned. If you're married and only one is applying, the rules are a little bit different. So the community spouse can have $128,000 and some change. And so there's a lot of different components to this. Once you get on Medi-Cal, then they look at the income to determine what your share of costs will be. So if you have Social Security or pensions or, whatever, then they're looking at that income and you will have to pay some share of costs. For an individual, like in a traditional sense where you go into a skilled nursing, they take everything except $35, assuming you're not married. Then there's some different rules for that. Recovery is the last part. So after you pass away, they want to see if you have anything in your estate to collect upon and reimburse themselves. So that means that if assets are in your name, they're totally recoverable. If assets are in the trust, they're not. So that's another reason why funding the trust is so important, because we want to make sure that there's not recovery. There is a VA aid and attendance benefit. We don't do nearly as many of these as we used to because they changed it so that there is a 3-year look back now for gifting. And your net worth has to be under that 129,000. So we just aren't doing as much of that as we used to before that look back became part of their rule structure. Next slide. There also is an End of Life Option Act. I always mention this because people ask. Unfortunately, you have to have mental capacity to be eligible for it. So most of the time, in Alzheimer's and dementia, you don't have capacity when you would like to do this. So it really applies more for things like cancer or things you have to, 2 doctors have to say that you will likely die within the next 6 months, and you have to be able to self-administer and swallow the medicine. So next slide. So I say this as sort of my public service announcement. I am extremely committed to educating as many people about estate planning as possible. I so wish I could do this live because I just love doing that. Talking to myself in a camera is not ideal, even though I know you're all out there. So talk to people about this. I remember when I was 12, my grandparents, my grandpa who had Alzheimer's, they showed me their trust. This is what triggered this for me. I of course was 12. I had never heard of this before. And I remember they brought it to me and they said, okay, Rebecca, this is what we're going to do after we're gone. And they had it set up where it was not ideal because they had 2 children, my mom and her brother, and they didn't get along with her brother, who now has Alzheimer's. And I said, don't set it up this way because it's going to make us all have to be together owning a house. That's a terrible idea. So So to my surprise, a few years later, went back to their estate planning attorney and changed it so that it wouldn't be like that, so that family could get cash, but we wouldn't own something together. So it's so important to talk through these issues. And in some families and some cultures, we don't talk about these things, but I can't emphasize enough that the gift that you are giving the people you love is a really well thought out plan. Next slide. So this is my contact information. And if anybody has any questions, usually we get so many, there's just a long line. I really, really want to encourage you. It's your time to get free legal advice. I want to encourage you to reach out, and no question is, unworthy of a good answer. So thank you all so much for being here and for learning about this. And I just want to say one thing about the Memory Club, because I have a couple extra minutes to say, when my grandpa got Alzheimer's, he died in 1992. So he probably had it in the mid 80s to certainly in the late 80s. No one talked about it. No one in the family talked about it. He couldn't talk about it. My grandma didn't talk about it. We were just in the situation where we all had to care for him and go through all the emotions. And I might get teary about this. All of our clients who come from that memory club, they are so much healthier and they are so much happier. I did not expect to be crying.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that. It is very, now you got me tearing up. But the people that do come to our memory club are able to connect with others and openly talk about things that they might not have anywhere else to talk about, and they create their own communities. And, it's not easy, but yeah, they might be a little healthier than somebody who doesn't have anywhere or anybody to talk about the things that they are struggling with privately.
So for every single one of you, there's 98 people out there, those of you who are not already part of Alzheimer's LA, so a few less. I encourage you so strongly to get involved in one of the memory clubs and just check it out, because it will make things better.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if anybody wants more information about the memory club, we will be emailing you information about what that is and mailing you some information. You can always call me. I'll share my contact information later and just have a one-on-one and talk to you about if it's a good fit for you or not, and what is, and I can certainly connect you to whatever is a good fit for you. But thank you for highlighting that. We did have some questions that came in.
Okay.
So let's do that. So the first one was, how long do you stay involved once a client hires your firm?
For life.
Great.
I actually was just working with our business coach yesterday, and we were talking about what, this is not going to mean anything to anyone, but it's called a headshot concept. And I was like, Erin, I don't know what my headshot concept. And by the end of this conversation, with all this work I've done, we realized that connecting with people for life who are the right matches for us is our headshot concept, right? It's what makes us unique and makes us sleep well at night and makes our team so happy at our office. So that's it for life.
Thank you. Another question, is it necessary to have both a conservatorship and a durable power of attorney?
So there are two types of conservatorship. One is over the person, and that replaces the Advanced Healthcare Directive, and one is over the estate, and that replaces the durable power of attorney. So if you have your durable power of attorney and you have your advanced directive, you shouldn't need a conservatorship at all. The only reason once in a while we do is if the person who is needing help refuses to accept the help. Then the only way we can make someone accept the help is through a conservatorship.
Can you explain again what funding the trust means?
Yes. So think about your assets. If you wrote down all of your assets, right? Like for me, I have a house with my husband, I have a car, I have some bank accounts, I have some retirement, I have some investments, and all of those things pre having a trust, I have a business, right? All of those things are in my name. So if they're in my name, when I die, my trustee has jurisdiction over nothing to administer my trust. And then we have to go to court to say, hey, we need to move that into the trust. But if you do it right from the beginning, then I retitle the house. So my house isn't owned by me, my husband and by me. It's owned by us as trustees of our trust. Certain investment accounts owned by the trust. Beneficiary designations, the trust, right? I have life insurance. I have a 6-year-old daughter. So life insurance, the beneficiary is not my husband, it's not my daughter, it's the trust. So that's what funding means.
Okay. Another question about trust. Who should become the trust protector?
A trust protector is a third-party neutral, never going to be a beneficiary, never going to be a trust, can't be your financial advisor. Sometimes your CPA might do it, but usually they're not the best choice. So it is someone outside, a friend, a distant relative who you really feel would be a good mediator if something goes wrong in the trust, or someone who'd be really good to name a new trustee. So we often we're in a lot of documents as trust protectors because people don't have them, or we're the backup trust protector.
This is a good one. Please explain springing powers. How are they made immediately effective?
You change the document. So whatever you have in your advance directive or power of attorney, if it says springing, or if it says you need one doctor to deem you incapacitated, or 2 doctors to deem you incapacitated, or it doesn't mention when it's effective, the default is you need 2 doctors then in California. So you do a new document and you make it immediately effective in the document.
Okay. What is the best way to start the estate planning process? What documents should I have ready?
So every estate planning firm is different. I can only speak to what we need, but basically we send a 2-page questionnaire out that's basic overview information. We send an asset sheet out to list all your assets, and we have a 3-page workbook that and a video that goes with it to guide you through thinking about who should be in each role and what your wishes are. And then we have, a 2-hour discussion to go over all of the details. But you will also need your deed because to retitle, we need the actual deed to prepare the new deed.
So some questions about being out of state or moving. If someone moves in from out of state from Texas and they have a trust and planning documents, should they have them reviewed?
So the generic answer is yes, because there are some differences. Oftentimes when we review out of state documents, Texas, not really, but if you come from back east, you probably need a new estate plan because no one does trusts there. They do what's called a testamentary trust, which is a will that goes through probate. And then when you go through probate, it births a trust. Totally defeats the purpose of being out of probate. So we never do those here, but they're New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, they all do them there. Texas, not so much. But what we find most people, because of 95% of the estate plans we review have these fatal flaws, we end up changing something anyway. But it's always a good idea. Even I tell our clients in California, if you're going to move to another state, we have no inheritance tax in California, but there's still about 10 or 15 states that do. So it's always good to have someone do a review.
Okay. My financial planner told me as long as I have beneficiaries on my accounts and a will, I don't need a trust. Is that wrong?
I'm not a financial planner, so I don't give financial advice. So don't listen to legal advice from your financial planner unless he or she is an attorney. But having said that, if technically speaking, if you have beneficiary designations on everything and you have a really well drafted will, it would be okay, but it's not the right solution for everyone based on individual family dynamics and needs. So there are people who call us, and after reviewing what they have and who they want to get, a will is fine and Benny designations are fine. But remember, you have to keep all those copies of those beneficiary designations. When those financial institutions merge, they don't keep them. And we are dealing in court right now with someone where they had a life insurance policy. They can't find the beneficiary designation, and we can't get anything without going to court.
What do you do with electronic accounts as a power of attorney when someone is in a care center?
I'm not sure what you mean by electronic accounts, but the durable power of attorney, if it is well drafted and relatively new, should include the power over digital assets, if that's what you mean. If it's an old one, it won't, because the laws didn't exist then.
Can a trust be contested?
Absolutely. There's crazy people everywhere, right? And there's not so nice attorneys everywhere. And so, yes, the goal is that you draft it well. And if there are family dynamics where you're worried that someone might do that, that we cross our T's and dot our I's with several outside of the box things that a lot of elder law attorneys do, estate planners don't. And we prepare so that if that person does do that, that they won't win.
Should a husband and wife's names be specifically on the trust?
So typically speaking, whoever owns the asset is the creator of the trust. So that's the grantor, trustor, settlor. It all means the same thing. You are typically also the co-trustees, and you are typically also the lifetime beneficiaries. So the next people in line don't benefit till after you're gone. There can be situations where, for a variety of reasons, one spouse is doing the trust and not the other. So it can happen, but it's not most common.
Okay. Can you talk about a trust account? Which has precedence, the trust account at the bank or the trust?
So when you think of your trust, like I just printed out some homeschooling papers for my daughter. Like it's a thick pile, much thicker than this, right? By the way, if your trust is 10 pages or 15 pages or maybe even 20 pages, it's missing a lot of stuff. So ours are about 50 pages. So think of it as just like a stapled pieces of paper stapled together. What counts is the owner of the account, right? What counts, if you have this document, this big, huge document, but there's no assets that say this document owns it, this document is worthless. So whatever the owner is means that the trust owns it, which means all the provisions that you have for who gets it and when and how will be followed. But if you have a trust and it says, oh, I have this Wells Fargo account, but that Wells Fargo account has your name on it and not the trust, you have to go to court to pull it in, maybe. I hope that answered the question.
We have two more questions.
Okay.
Back to springing powers. They should be made immediately effective upon what circumstance?
Signing the document. So when I say immediately effective, my advance directive says, and my power of attorney says, that the moment I signed it, it was immediately effective, and my husband had the power to help me if I needed it. Now, when you think about it logically, I'm 51 years old, I'm healthy. If I go to the doctor and he goes with me, you think they're going to listen to him over me? Hell no, right? So it's immediately effective, but it's not going to be used until I need it. The power of attorney is a little bit different, which is why I said, don't give this document out, because if he took it, he could add himself as power of attorney to all my accounts at all of my financial institutions. So I tell clients, keep it and let the clients know who we are. And if something happens, A, we want to know it, and B, we can decide to give that document out or not.
And the last question, what is the minimum cost to set up a trust or to start estate planning?
So again, I can better speak for our firm than every firm. There is a huge wide range. And unfortunately, in estate planning, you get what you pay for. So if you go cheap, it's probably not going to work. And then it will cost a lot more in the end. We are on the expensive side because we do so much hand holding, and we have the lifelong relationship, and we have the, detailed funding and the lifelong maintenance meetings and unlimited, access to us. So for an individual, we usually start at $5,700, and for a couple, usually $6,200. We have a flat fee of $9.95 to review all of the stuff and go over everything for a couple hours to just kind of see what you need. And then it could be hourly after that if you already have something. There are people who will do it for less, but I've just found they're not as comprehensive. So, but hopefully I'm starting, well, I'm not going to talk about it now. There's another business I have in mind to help more and more and more people, but it's not launched yet.
Well, I'd like to hear about it when it is launched. Let me check if there's just one more question or anything. Okay, I think there might be. The bank set up a trust account. There's also a trust setup, which takes precedence, or does it matter? I think we already answered this one, right?
So the trust account is what the trust owns. So it should be one and the same in that way.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for taking the time this Saturday to be with us and to answer all of these questions. And if you'd like to talk to Rebecca privately, her contact information is on the screen. And as I shared, we will be emailing evaluations to you. And so you have the opportunity to provide your contact information, and someone from Rebecca's team, I think you mentioned Jessica, maybe somebody else, will reach out and help answer your questions. So thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. All right, so at this time, we're going to take a quick 3-minute stretch break. So go fill up your coffee. I need more coffee. Go get some water or snacks, run to the bathroom, or just take a stretch in your seat. Roll your shoulders back, stretch your arms if you're comfortable doing so. If you can, stand up, just kind of stretch it out, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, we'll get started in about a minute. Dr. Nash, you can unmute yourself if you'd like.
We unmuted.
Thank you, Ben. All right, so we'll start in about 1 minute. Oh, I think we can just start now, actually. All right, so welcome back. I hope you will find this next part of our morning to be insightful and inspirational. Today, we're honored to have three brave individuals who will share with us how they have navigated a diagnosis of early stage Alzheimer's disease, or MCI, which stands for mild cognitive impairment. And they will share with us how they continue on this journey. It takes courage to speak publicly, but to experience memory loss and speak publicly is nothing short of heroic. Our guests today are helping us break down the barriers and stigma that is all too often associated with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Families in the early stages face unique challenges around disclosing their diagnosis with friends or family. If they do share, sometimes families experience what we call friendship divorce, where they find people that they once spent time with distancing themselves. And especially now during COVID and the shutdown that we have all experienced, people in the early stages and care partners might have found themselves a little bit more isolated. But we will hear today from our guests how they have been able to adapt, how they've balanced new responsibilities and roles, and how they've navigated this new diagnosis or this new reality. So I'd like to thank Cindy, Ben, and Dr. Dwayne Nash for being with us today. So we'll get started with Dr. Nash. Can you share with us, Dr. Nash, your diagnosis and what do you do for a living, or what did you do for a living?
Yes, my diagnosis is mild cognitive impairment that's due to Alzheimer's. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. And I was a practicing family physician.
And when did you get diagnosed?
I was diagnosed in 2010.
Okay. Thank you. Cindy, what is your diagnosis and what do you do for a living, or what did you do for a living?
I was a bilingual teacher working in a school to teach children English, a variety of languages, everything from Spanish, French, lots of Russian and Asian languages, children who were delightful and wonderful. And of course, all that's gone now.
Yeah. Ben, what do you do for a living and what is your relationship to Cindy?
Oh, well, I'm Cindy's husband. We hit 50 years in August.
Wow, congratulations.
I'm 73, Cindy's 72. And while she was a teacher and near full-time volunteer for Girl Scouting, I was in the entertainment industry, both corporate executive and small business owner. I'm now overwhelmingly retired, as is Cindy, for the last number of years.
Great. And so let's go back to Dr. Nash. Dr. Nash, can you share with us what were your initial symptoms and how did you come about your diagnosis?
10 years ago, well, 3 years before I was diagnosed, I had applied for long-term care insurance and I had a normal memory test done. It took about 20, 30 minutes. And 3 years later, after my mother had died from Alzheimer's, my younger brother was diagnosed, I volunteered to be in an Alzheimer's research study, and I was going to be in the normal control group. And when I went in and did my memory testing, my full neuropsych examination, I noticed that I was having problems answering some of the questions. And as a result of that, I ended up seeing a neurologist and was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease.
And what was your response?
I'm sorry. I really, at the time I was doing the memory test, I didn't really notice any symptoms at all. But later, after I went home and I really did a lot of thinking about it, looking back over the previous months, I was having some issues that nobody else noticed, my nurse, my wife, or patients or colleagues, but I noticed personally. And remember things about patients and difficulty doing continuing medical education. And then I ended up seeing a neurologist and getting officially diagnosed.
Okay. And what was your response to the diagnosis?
I can remember sitting in the chair, looking out the window when I was doing my memory testing. And when she started asking me to remember these 10 words she gave me, because 3 years before I just popped them right out, all 10 of them. This time I could only remember 5. And then I had trouble with some spatial parts of the memory testing. And I had a difficulty identifying photos of objects that I should have known. And it was total blank. And I remember right then is when I knew that my time had arrived, that I probably had Alzheimer's disease. And I was cold, sweaty, and the next day I did a lot of crying over the next few days. I went home. I knew I had the diagnosis. I already said if it happened, when it happened, I was quitting. And so I prepared myself over the next month before I saw the neurologist, and I slowed my practice down, quit seeing new patients, and I had people come in and made sure they had their physicals and everything taken care of. And then, when that month was up, I discontinued practicing.
Yeah, that must have been really difficult and a very big change for you. What has changed since then? How, aside from you quitting and changing your, working, what has been impacted?
Well, I went from, seeing 20, 30 patients a day, staying very busy, to boom, one day I was through. And I did have a month to be thinking about it and preparing. And so I just redirected my energies into things I like to do. I'm an organic gardener. We happen to live on 10 acres north of Austin. And I started doing a lot of the projects that I put off. I also got actively involved with the Alzheimer's organizations, Meals on Wheels, Habitat for Humanity. I volunteered at school gardens. And so I kept myself busy.
Yeah.
And I do writing. I write a blog and I was already doing that before I was diagnosed. And so I continued doing that and I stayed pretty active.
Yeah.
And since then I've moved from Austin to Santa Barbara, and where my 3 grandkids live, and I'm actively involved with them and actively doing the same things here I did in the Austin area.
That's wonderful, being closer to family and
yes.
That's
we made that decision when we were diagnosed that we knew, looking 10 years ahead, we wanted to get close to family, before it was too late. So we wouldn't have to make that move when we're older.
Yeah, great. And for you, Cindy, what has changed? What has been impacted for you with your Alzheimer's diagnosis?
Gosh, from the very beginning, I immediately stopped driving because I didn't want to cause any harm and resold my car, changed the responsibility for financial and legal things to our adult children. And those things I didn't mind. What I do mind is not being able to set up menus so I can enjoy cooking and doing for my husband as I did many years back. I miss that. Although now we are cooking together, so some of that's coming back.
Ben misses that too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I do miss that I can't get around on my own, that I can't go where I want to go whenever I feel like it. I have that loss of freedom and that ability to get around. Now that COVID has taken a better path, we're able to get out, we're able to be with people. We have entertained here in our home, and that feels good. We've also traveled a little bit. So those kinds of things are helpful.
Yeah, so you did have to make some adjustments, but you're kind of working within this new reality and still able to enjoy a lot of things.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
And Ben, what changes have you guys made that maybe Cindy didn't cover or talk about?
Cindy was diagnosed in October of 2020. But I had noticed changes in her and her behavior more than a year prior to that. The changes were gradual, but became more pronounced over time. Hence our recently go to an exam at Kaiser where we are insured and get a full diagnosis, treatment, and medication as best they can. But very simply, our lives have changed in nearly every way. Cindy less able to do what she was most capable of doing in the past, requiring me to take a lead where in the past I had not taken the lead. The most obvious issue was planning and maintaining a calendar of events for the two of us, the need for us to always be together or having Cindy with someone worthy of care and trust. And of course, as Cindy mentioned, cooking. I've benefited from nearly 20 years of wonderful cooking, but now, while we're still eating okay, just fine, things are not exactly the same. The pandemic has forced us to change our lives separate from before Alzheimer's. So the next year will be a new challenge because we've had a year of of Alzheimer's under COVID and restrictions. And now, of course, we are reawakening, as Cindy mentioned, and there'll be a new and different challenge as we move ahead. But basically everything changes.
Yeah, and you mentioned something, the role reversal, where you're now taking on different roles and responsibilities, and maybe Cindy's also taking on different roles and the responsibilities. So there's changes within your relationship. And another good thing another important thing you highlighted, that we're going to be transitioning because of COVID. So things are going to change, and that will be another time of transition for you guys and how you modify, how you kind of run your life day to day. Cindy, where do you find support?
Well, certainly Ben is my main support, but by the same token, the whole family has chipped in because Ben, based on what I felt was important for everyone in the family to know what was going on. So we've included them all. And frankly, we do a lot of Zooms. We do a lot of visiting online, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I miss the hugs and I miss the being together, but it's a way of staying in touch and knowing that I have that support and that I'm still me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you guys also participated in Memory Club. Do you find support with that group?
Yes, as well.
Yeah. And Ben, any other additional places that you guys find support?
Well, as Cindy mentioned, yes, we made the decision early on that we would share her diagnosis with good friends and family. Cindy's somewhat the matriarch on her side of the family, so it's crucial they be involved and informed. Family members, Zoom conversations, no doubt, that's true. And yes, the answer is yes. Alzheimer's LA has been terrific. I didn't know you existed. We looked around and found you and Memory Club, and we're now part of GRAD, which is sort of Memory Advanced. It is wonderful that you exist. It's wonderful that you are managing your budgets well, that you've got talented people, including you, that we have found very good support, information, education. This is crucial to know what we might be expecting in the future. We are not certainly experts in Alzheimer's. And so we've had to learn, listen, and be supported by both you and your team and those who are in a similar position to us, who have received a diagnosis similar to Cindy.
Yeah, being able to connect with other people who have similar concerns and challenges so that you guys can feel part of a community, I think is also very valuable. Dr. Nash, where do you find support?
Mainly from my family, and now that we're all here in Santa Barbara close together, we interact. I have 3 grandkids. I interact with them a lot of support from that. I do my blog, and I still communicate with a lot of my patients on Facebook and on online, and then my wife initially didn't kind of want to talk about my diagnosis that much, but I drug her to my presentations I do and different talks, and we've been involved with all the Alzheimer's walks. And she's had to sit and listen to me talk, give talks or answer questions like this. And so she's much more knowledgeable than she was over the last 10 years. She's gained a lot of knowledge about Alzheimer's and about being ready. And we've done all our advanced planning that needs to be done. We recently completed that last year. And so all that's done, out of the way. And so that's where I get most of my support.
Yeah, that's great. And I have met your wife. She's lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Dr. Nash, do you have any advice for anybody that's joining today, whether, just attendees that are having questions about their memory, or should they get a diagnosis, or any advice for professionals that might be attending today?
I have a lot of advice for doctors. One thing on memory testing is to make sure that you had a really good, proper workup and make sure that the diagnosis is correct. Nowadays, you can with good degree of definite that your diagnosis is correct. It's Alzheimer's or Lewy body or whatever. You can know your diagnosis, then your neurologist or whoever's taking care of it can treat. So make sure you've had a good evaluation and make sure the diagnosis is correct, and then go. I'd also recommend it, like caregivers, you got to get help, and you need to start out early, like they've done. Most people don't do what they've done. And then for doctors, number two things: listen to your patient. Because now I'm a patient instead of a doctor, practicing physician, and doctors don't listen to you. Make them listen to you, and then lost my train of thought. The other thing that is, as a physician, when you're seeing this couple in your office, you need to be talking to her, not to him. When you're in the office, be talking to her. She's the patient. It already happens to me, where my wife and I right now, I'm doing really well. And I found that the doctors want to talk to her instead of talking to me, instead of looking at me and talking. And those are two big things: to listen and talk to the patient.
Thank you, Dr. Nash. And I know that you have shared.
And make sure you've done a proper workup.
Yeah, a proper workup. And I know you've also shared with me, which I think is a great tip, is for anybody that has concerns about their memory to make an appointment just to talk about memory concerns.
Right, correct. Go in for memory, because you go in for your arthritis and you try to bring up memory, you didn't allow much time. Go in just for memory, go prepared, maybe bring somebody with you, and be ready for the appointment.
Yeah,
and keep them focused and don't let them ignore you.
Yeah, bring somebody with you is a good tip. Write down some questions or things that you've noticed. And really be a good advocate for yourself or whoever you're with, that this is important, that you really want to talk about it. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nash. Those are great tips. Cindy, any advice or last comments that you want to share?
I have discovered that by keeping a log of what I do and having a good calendar, one of the things I used to have was a birthday book. And unfortunately, I gave it to my daughter, and I'm about to have her copy it for me so that I can have that. That way I can keep track of the family and know what's going on, know day to day what's happening. And just recording special events because they were delightful and special.
Yeah. And I remember you mentioning the importance of being realistic about the expectations that you have for yourself, and really being kind with yourself about what you still can do.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, and I know you and Ben share openly with your family and friends, so they know when you need support.
And we're especially looking forward to a new grandchild in September.
That'll be exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's great. And Ben, any advice or any final comments that you have that you feel are important for others to know?
Yeah, yes. I mean, we're not prepared to give advice and counsel to professionals. This is all new to us. But for those who do get the diagnosis, first and foremost, there is no shame in having this illness. I mean, this is not something that's earned or deserved. Cindy's mother died of Alzheimer's. And so the risk factor increased dramatically for Cindy. And unfortunately, she ended up with the disease. But there's no shame to it. And so we've been quite open, sharing with friends and family. And so that enables us to reach out and seek additional help. While I'm clearly the primary caregiver and certainly will be, and happy to do so, Cindy's cared for me for so long, that reaching out and asking for help is something we have no concern about doing, and people are remarkably wonderful and supportive when I do ask, or we do arrange things. And it's crucial to have that help. I need time to decompress every now and then, and getting assistance from others is invaluable. And we're going to continue to do that, both with friends and family. Our plan is to be physically active and socially interactive as our game plan of life. Our expectations have been adjusted. We tend in general to think shorter term than longer, but that's just part of one of the many ways that we've had to adjust because our lives have changed. Going back 3-4 years ago, our thinking was just different. And so now we're going to do the best we can for as long as we can by, again, being physically active and socially interactive.
Yeah, wonderful. And you had mentioned something too about education and being as prepared as possible. I know you have your legal stuff done, and you talked about wandering prevention or preparation. Do you want to say anything more about that? Have you guys talked about that?
Say that again, please. The
wandering preparation.
That is not an issue. There is no issue at the moment for Cindy in wandering. We are together, and/or she's with somebody wonderful. Legal and financial is done. When we got the firm diagnosis, we took care of that with our advisors. And so those basics are behind us. Cindy does wear a medical ID bracelet when we're out, which is, it seems pretty obvious to do, and we are doing that. It's nothing more than phone numbers to call in the event that she does have a problem, but to date it's been zero. And so what happens a year from today, we don't know. We had a year of COVID, which restricted us in every way. Now as we move ahead the next 12 months, we will see how much we can do and to what extent we're going to be successful at doing. I'm pleased to say we just took 5 days out of town, out of our zip code on our own, being, as I say, dose. That is our two doses of COVID. We're both vaccinated. And so getting out and about is now a possibility, but our expectations are adjusted and we tend to plan shorter term. The next 12 months, I don't know where we'll be. We hope for the best.
These are all great tips and great things that you're sharing. And one thing that really stuck with me, which I really like, is your agreement that you already mentioned between you and Cindy, that you're going to do the best you can for as long as you can. Mm-hmm.
And that, by the way, is a quote from Cindy, that she came up with that. Totally agree. And that's how we are proceeding.
I love that, Cindy. I love that. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. I really appreciate your willingness to be here and to just answer some of my questions. I don't know that there's any questions from the panel, or I'm sorry, from the audience. But I really appreciate your time and sharing your stories, and thank you for being here. Let me just check if there's any questions or comments. We do have a comment in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I agree. Thank you, guys. All right. So once again, thank you for providing us insight into your journey. And so we're going to move along toward the next part of our show here. During this time, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to take a quick poll about what do you guys do to practice self-care. And we're going to also take another stretch break. And to complete this stretch break, we're going to view one of our Take 5 yoga videos. You can do this along with us, or you can do your own stretches. You can, again, run to the bathroom, get more coffee, grab more paper for notes and reminders for yourself. And you should see a poll if you have some time to answer that. And then we're going to start the Take 5 yoga video that we have. Thank you.
Welcome to Take 5, where we take a 5-minute break for self-care. I'm Marisol, and I'll be guiding you in a quick yoga sequence. Let's begin by finding a comfortable chair and a quiet space, and just bring your body up to the front of your chair. This is a very easy way to relax some pressure from the low back and also get some movement into the back of the legs and the hamstrings. So just bring your legs out. You want to scooch your body right towards the edge, but still feel secure. And you're going to flex the toes pointing up and take a deep breath in, reaching up overhead, fingers up towards the ceiling. And as you exhale, hinge at the hips and relax your body all the way down. Relax your hands so that they're at your ankles or at your shins. Nice deep breath in and exhale, letting your torso gently drop a little bit further. Feel that lengthening along the back of the legs. One more time, deep breath in and exhale. Just very slowly rolling out of this position, bringing both feet firmly on the ground, and you can scoot back on your chair a little bit. Here we're going to bring some movement into the spine, opening up some space in the vertebrae, hands on your thighs, nice long spine, and we're going to take a deep breath as we arch our back forward, and then exhale, drawing the navel in towards the spine, rolling both shoulders forward. You can close the eyes and take the gaze inward, inhaling forward and exhaling fully all the way back. Let the breath completely release on that exhale as you draw the navel in. One more time, inhaling forward and exhaling back. Feel the opening along the back of the shoulder blades. Great, inhale. And coming to center, drop both shoulders down, releasing any tension you're carrying on the upper back, along the neck. And drop the left arm. If you have a chair where you can reach the bottom, you can just grab onto the edge there. If not, just relaxing the left arm and take a deep breath, raising the right arm overhead. Take a look at your fingers, deep breath. You can close the eyes as well. Our intention is to bring some space along the ribs, opening up between the hips and the ribs. One more deep breath here. Inhale and exhale. Great. Go ahead and release. Center yourself. And again, grabbing the right edge of the chair or just relaxing your arm. Inhale. Bringing that left arm all the way up. I like to close my eyes. It actually helps bring a little bit more awareness to my body and notice where I'm tight. Inhale and exhale. Wonderful. Relax both shoulders down, and we're going to open up some more space along the back side of the shoulders, specifically that edge between the shoulder blades and the spine. So bring both arms up with a little bend. We're just going to thread the right arm underneath the left, and if you can, you're going to grab the opposite hand. If not, then you're just going to rest the hands against each other. Take a deep breath here as you focus on releasing any tension between the shoulder blades. If this feels comfortable for you, you can even try taking a deep breath and gently raising both elbows about an inch up. And then exhale down to your starting position. We're just going to switch sides. So thread that left arm underneath the right. And take a deep breath here. And exhale. Let's try lifting up a little bit and creating some more space. Inhale, raise the elbows, both of them just about an inch. and then exhale. Go ahead and release. You're going to place both hands on your legs. Close the eyes down, and this is one of my favorites. So easy, and we forget to take care of our neck, and we hold so much tension and stress in our minds. So let's go ahead and give that part of our body some attention. Drop the chin to the chest and slowly roll the right ear to the right shoulder and all the way around. Left ear, left shoulder, and down to the chin. One more time, all the way around. Take it slow. Any creaking or crackling, it's part of the process. And we're going to switch it to the opposite side. Left ear, left shoulder, all the way around. And one more time. Inhaling to center, nice deep breath. Feel yourself grounding into the earth. Feel yourself relaxed. Thank you for taking 5 with us today. For more free caregiver resources, please call 844-HELP-ALZ or visit alzheimersla.org.
Welcome back, everyone. If you were able to participate in that yoga video, I hope you feel refreshed. Let me first read a couple of comments that did come in for our panelists. From Kathy, thank you for being open and vulnerable. It all helps. And from Christina, thank you, Dr. Nash, for your insight. I had a personal experience with my aunt when we tried to get her diagnosed and help, and it was a struggle. So thank you for sharing all of your insight. It truly does help others. And from our poll, so how do you guys practice self-care? It looks like most of you exercise, which is wonderful. Getting out is great. I like going on long walks too, and just breathing nice fresh air, and then connecting with friends. So important to socialize and to interact with others. And then some other wonderful things that you guys all do. Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next part of our program here. Okay, so I hope you were able to participate in that Take 5 video. Before I introduce our last speaker, I just want to let you know that you can always come back to our website anytime and try that yoga Take 5 video on your own, or you can check out some of the other wonderful videos that we have listed on our website, which focus on meditation, breath work, and mindfulness. Each one of those was created to help you practice self-care, and you can access them anytime on our website or YouTube channel. So as a reminder, as we have done before, any questions can be submitted by typing them in the Q&A chat box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. My colleague Tori will help answer your questions directly or hold on to them and share them with me so that I can feed them to the expert during the Q&A portion. If your questions are not answered today, I would encourage you to connect with your doctor or visit the Jonah Goldrich Center for Alzheimer's and Memory Disorders website. We will share the link in the chat after the presentation. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Zaldi Tan, an experienced memory and geriatric medicine specialist. Dr. Tan directs the Memory and Aging Program at Cedars-Sinai Health System and serves as Medical Director of the Jonah Goldrich Center for Alzheimer's and Memory Disorders in the Department of Neurology, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Dr. Tan's research focuses on risk factors and preventative measures for Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, along with health services research aimed at improving the quality of care for dementia patients. We're so honored to be able to welcome you to our conference today, Dr. Zaldi Tan.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for that wonderful introduction, and I was just actually listening to some of the panelists talking about their experiences, and it's really touching, and I learn something new every time I hear from our patients and caregivers. So kudos to the Alzheimer's Los Angeles for putting together this wonderful conference, and to all our patients and caregivers who are really wonderful and unsung heroes in this journey that we all are taking for Alzheimer's disease. Should I get started? Perfect. Thank you very much, Alicia, again. All right, so again, welcome to all of you. And in behalf of Cedars-Sinai Department of Neurology and the Goldridge Center for Alzheimer's Disease and Memory Disorders, we are happy to be here partnering with Alzheimer's Los Angeles in this early memory loss conference. Next slide. So we thought, in speaking with the Alzheimer's Los Angeles leadership, that we would best use this time that we have together answering some of the more common questions that our friends at Alzheimer's Los Angeles have encountered in trying to help patients and families with Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia, or just overall concerned about brain health. So these are what we will cover today. So take a deep breath and we'll get started with the first question. Next. So is it Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia? This is probably one of the most common questions that I get asked in my practice is, does my mother, does my husband, does my spouse have Alzheimer's disease or dementia? It's very interesting, this question, because I find it that it's a common question because it's, I can see how it could be confusing because Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia, but it is the most common type of dementia, and overwhelmingly so. Next slide. So if we consider this umbrella called dementia, dementia is a neurologic disease that affects memory as well as other cognitive functions. So our mind is responsible for memory, but it's also responsible for attention, executive function, which is the ability to plan and sequence things, remember faces, figure out directions, and when we're driving or we're navigating our environment. So our mind is responsible for a lot of different things. But for dementia, what happens is that it affects these different functions of the mind, such that there are some difficulty in navigating the world around us, either because of memory or other cognitive functions. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, responsible for about 70% of all forms of dementia, but it's certainly not the only form of dementia. There's vascular dementia, Lewy body, frontotemporal dementia, and other dementias, which we will cover in today's presentation. Next slide. So let's start with Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, as I mentioned, is the most common form of dementia, but it is only one of several forms of dementia. What happens with Alzheimer's disease, there's this accumulation of these abnormal proteins called amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. So these amyloid plaques and tangles are thought to be responsible for the death of brain cells, because it elicits oxidative stress, inflammation, other things that really are not good for the brain. Clinically, what patients present with Alzheimer's disease is really memory, particularly short-term memory. As I will show in the different other forms of dementia, memory is not always the most prominent symptom that's problematic in people with dementia. But with Alzheimer's disease, it's really memory, at least in the early phase. Now, as the disease progresses, in the moderate to late stage of the disease, there are other symptoms. So people can start having problems with walking or swallowing, or can have hallucinations or delusions, but that tend to occur in the late stages of the disease, unlike in other forms of dementia, where that may be the presenting symptom. There's also an element of family history in having a first-degree relative with Alzheimer's disease increases one's risk, but a lot of cases of Alzheimer's disease is actually sporadic, meaning you may not have family history of Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and yet you develop it for some reason. There's also late onset and early onset forms. Early onset typically are people who get Alzheimer's disease in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, early 60s, I should say. And the earlier the onset, the more impact the genetic component has. And with the late onset, which is the more common form of dementia, typically it's a combination of genetic risk as well as environmental factors. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Alzheimer's is not the only form of dementia. There are other forms of dementia. One common one is what we call vascular dementia. Vascular dementia, as the term implies, has to do with the blood vessels, or the blood vessels that supply the brain with its needed blood supply, oxygen, nutrients, etc. So in its simplest form, vascular dementia is caused by a decrease in the blood flow in the brain. Now, it could be a sudden decrease in blood flow, like you would get, for example, if you had a clot that travels to the brain and causes a stroke. But it can also be caused by years and years of decreased blood flow that can be seen in people as they get older and they develop cholesterol deposits or other forms of obstruction to the blood flow of the brain. The brain is a highly metabolic organ. It requires a lot of oxygen, a lot of nutrients. So whenever there is a decreased blood supply or nutrients that go to the brain, it affects the brain cells adversely, such that over years, it can cause forgetfulness and a type of dementia called vascular dementia. Next slide. There's also a dementia called Lewy body dementia, or LBD. Lewy body dementia is different from Alzheimer's and vascular dementia because it is caused by the accumulation of an abnormal protein called Lewy bodies. And these proteins tend to get deposited in the nerve cells and the brain cells. And just like the amyloid is thought to disrupt the communication between brain cells, the chemical balance of the brain, and can cause brain cells to die. The interesting thing about Lewy body dementia, as I mentioned earlier, Alzheimer's disease is really short-term memory. With Lewy body dementia, the first thing that is usually noticed is, besides memory, is also people can get visual hallucinations. So they can see things that aren't there. It may not be scary or bothersome to the patient. It could be, for example, seeing children playing when there are no children there, or they could see insects, or they could see, in some cases, deceased relatives coming to visit them. So again, this could be disturbing. This may not be disturbing, but what's important is that they tend to get visual hallucination, and they also can get sleep problems called REM behavior disorder, wherein they essentially act out their dreams. So this is a very interesting type of dementia, Lewy body dementia. It's not as common as Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia, but it's not rare. And one thing that's challenging with Lewy body dementia is that people who get it tend to have behavioral issues early on. Whereas in Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, the behavioral problems can occur, but it usually occurs later in the course of the disease. Next slide. Then we also have the frontotemporal dementia. Frontotemporal dementia, as the name implies, affects specific parts of the brain, specifically the frontal part, which is right here in beneath the forehead, and then the temporal part, which is right behind the ears. So these parts of the brain serve specific functions. For example, the frontal lobe is known to be involved in impulse control. So as you can imagine, when the frontal lobe is affected, people tend to present with personality changes, with lack of impulse control. So for example, a common one, which is quite disturbing, is that a person with frontotemporal dementia may say things that are unkind or impolite we should say, sometimes even racist comments, which is very atypical for the person and very bothersome for everyone involved. Frontotemporal dementia is, also could present, that's the behavioral variant of, or BVFTD that we call it, but it can also present with difficulty with words. They can find, difficulty with expressing themselves, for example. The other interesting thing about frontotemporal dementia is that it tends to affect younger people, which is even more devastating than Alzheimer's disease, late onset. So it affects people in their 40s, 50s, and early 60s, typically. Next slide. And then finally, Parkinson's dementia. Parkinson's dementia, as the name implies, is the dementia associated with people who have Parkinson's disease. So people who have Parkinson's disease for several years can develop not just the motor symptoms, as we think of Parkinson's as the shaking or the tremors, the slowness in movement, etc. And that is definitely the most common manifestation of Parkinson's disease. But Parkinson's disease patients can also get memory problems later in the course of the disease. It tends to affect men more than women, and it can manifest as similar to Lewy body dementia, with some hallucinations, with the decrease in movement, etc. So that's another common form of dementia. Next. So why is it important to know what type of dementia you or your loved one has? Well, it's important because the course is different, meaning symptoms appear in a different order depending on the type of dementia. It's also true that the treatments are different. So if you're not sure what type of dementia you have, it may be worth talking to your physician about it, and so that you know what you're dealing with and what the future looks like. So transitioning into another topic, what are the diagnostic workup for Alzheimer's disease and dementia? Next slide. So any type of dementia, you have to start with a good history. So the answer, a lot of the answers lie within you, within the caregivers. So a good physician, nurse practitioner, or whoever the health professional is that's doing the diagnosis will spend quite a bit of time asking you important questions. And in fact, if you are prepared, if you're planning to see a memory specialist or a primary care physician about it, you can really help them out by jotting down in a piece of paper the answers to these questions. So I developed this mnemonic called NW-CALMS, which I teach to my medical students, my residents and fellows, that they should ask all patients who present with memory problem to figure out what type of memory problem we're dealing with. So first is nature. What type of, when a lot of patients come in and saying, oh, my father's getting forgetful, and then pause, right? And I always ask, can you tell me more? Because the reason is because forgetfulness is different for every person. So I would like to know if forgetfulness means that they're forgetting appointments, are there repeating questions or conversations, are they getting lost while walking or driving, have they missed bill payments, has there been personality changes, are they misplacing things frequently? So the more specific you can get, the better, and you will be able to help the clinician who's diagnosing your loved one. The other thing I ask is when, and this is a very important question, but very difficult to answer. And I think partly it's because when we love someone, we don't really count things. We don't really keep records, right? But in the case of dementia, it's important to know exactly when, not exactly, but approximately when it started. Because again, it will give you an idea of where you are in the disease and what the rate of progression is. So are we talking, and I'm not talking about when it got worse, I'm talking about the first time that that it's noticed that someone's memory or cognitive function was not good, was not as good as it used to be. So we're talking about months, years, decades, or days, and those have diagnostic implications. Next is course. Is it stable? Is it worsening? And if it's worsening, is it like abrupt worsening, meaning a stepwise progression, or is it very slowly progressive? For example, if you can say that, my wife was doing well until she had that knee replacement surgery, and then she went home and she was never the same. So that's different from someone who is doing very well and has a very, very slow or subtle progression. Next is ADLs or IDLs. ADLs are activities of daily living, and IDLs are instrumental activities of daily living. So basically what this is asking is, what functional impairments have you observed? Meaning they were used to be very good cooks, now they can't cook anymore, or they used to be good drivers, now they get lost, or they used to be able to balance a checkbook and pay and do their taxes, now they're not able to. Functional impairment is very important because it's one of the diagnostic criteria for dementia. And for that, someone really needs to think about, what are they able to do and not able to do anymore, because that would really help establish where we are in the diagnosis. And then L is life situation, meaning has there been any change in your ways of living that triggered this change? For example, moving to a new house or apartment can bring out some subtle cognitive impairment that may not be observed in a home that someone has lived at for decades. So, or losing a spouse or a caregiver can trigger that. So life situation is important to take note of. And then mood, is there a change in mood, meaning someone looks depressed, tearful, unable to sleep, losing pleasure in things that they used to derive pleasure from. The reason is because depression is sometimes called pseudo-dementia. They can cause people to appear like they have dementia when in fact they have depression. So that's important. And then finally, status of health. Has there been any acute illness, any thyroid issues or electrolyte imbalance that can explain the change in memory or other cognitive functions? So NW columns. So the more each of these items you can provide to your primary care physician or memory specialist, the more helpful that partnership will be. Next slide. The other thing that your clinician will probably do is do some sort of cognitive test. So there are several cognitive tests out there. This is not meant for you to do it yourself. This is really meant for a professional to do it with you in order to know what it means. And the reason why a professional needs to do it is because there are certain subtleties in the test that really require someone who's properly trained in order to know what's going on. But besides the history, typically they will do some sort of cognitive test to see how the different parts of your brain or your mind is working. Next. And depending on how you do with those, they might recommend a neuropsychological test. Neuropsychological test is not for everyone, but for some people. For example, people who are very highly educated, or those who have lower levels of education, or whose first language is not English, it may be helpful to add to the diagnosis. It is quite involved. Sometimes it takes 3 hours, sometimes it takes 12 hours of psychological testing. So it's not an easy thing to go through, but it may help figure out what's going on in certain people where the diagnosis is still not clear after a clinician evaluates the patient. Next. In terms of labs, in fact, the labs for memory problem or dementia is not very complicated. Usually we take a blood count, a comprehensive metabolic profile, which looks at electrolytes, kidney function, etc. And then we also check vitamin B12 and TSH. And that's pretty much all we check for in the routine labs. Next. But in certain patients who have atypical presentations or who presents young, we may check other things like inflammatory factors, like autoimmune markers, or paraneoplastic or infectious workup or neoplastic. We also could, for example, do a lumbar puncture and check the cerebrospinal fluid for markers of Alzheimer's disease, like A beta, total tau, phospho-tau. Again, not for everyone. My colleague at the Goldberg Center at Cedars-Sinai, Dr. Sarah Kremen, who has generously lent me some of these slides, actually routinely does this for some of these patients who are presenting in a typical way. Next. The other thing to do for diagnosis is brain imaging. So we usually get a brain MRI, or for those who have a pacemaker or some contraindication for a brain MRI, we can get a CAT scan. It's important to make sure that there are no masses, no evidence of dilation of the ventricles, which could be a sign of normal pressure hydrocephalus. But typically, a structural brain MRI or a CAT scan is all that we need. In certain patients, again, who has unclear diagnosis, we may want to get more advanced imaging, like an FDG PET, amyloid PET, dopa PET, or tau PET, which is coming soon. Again, not for everyone, but for certain people, we may want to do that. All these tests are available at Cedars-Sinai, but we only do it for certain patients who absolutely need it. Because most of the time a brain MRI or CAT scan will be sufficient. Next. So this is just an illustration of the changes that happen in the brain when someone is on the road to getting Alzheimer's disease. So most of our patients present on the far right of this. So meaning by the time they see us in our center, they already are experiencing memory loss or functional decline. But in reality, the disease process starts years, if not decades, before the first sign of a memory loss. So as you can see here, amyloid, the abnormal protein, and the tau tend to rise years, sometimes 10 or 20 years, even before the first sign of memory loss. So I'd like to show you this because this will help clarify why we're changing in our management. Next. And what's coming up is that eventually your doctor will be able to get a blood test and measure amyloid or phospho-tau or neurofilament light in your blood, and will be able to tell you whether you're on the road to getting Alzheimer's disease even before you experience the first sign of memory change. So this is the future, and it will be a very interesting time to talk about what the consequences of early diagnosis are. Next. So medications for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Next. So this is where we are in terms of the treatment for dementia. What we have in this blue line is untreated Alzheimer's disease. When we give something like donepezil or Aricept, Exelon, etc., it goes into the red line, which is symptomatic treatment. But once you get to the green part, this is where we want to be. Eventually, is get disease-modifying therapy that will actually decrease the rate of progression of the disease. We're not there yet, and that's why clinical trials are so important to get to that green line so that we can actually change the course of the disease. Next. These are the FDA-approved medications for dementia. I'm not going to go through it in detail. You probably know them, but just know that all of these medications are symptomatic treatments, meaning they do not change the course of the disease, but they can improve some of the symptoms of the disease. Next. The question is, if you have someone with advanced dementia, is it, or especially Alzheimer's disease, is it worthwhile to keep giving them donepezil or memantine, or should we stop? Well, there is evidence that even people with advanced dementia could benefit from continuing donepezil and memantine. However, if there is a change in tolerance or ability to swallow the pills, etc., it's worthwhile to talk to your doctor about trial discontinuation, because these are symptomatic medications and they could be restarted if needed, if the symptoms get worse, if they're stopped. Next. So natural supplements and dementia, hope or hype. I just want to tell you the challenge of us who are, practicing Western medicine in answering this question is that there's not a lot of good studies in each of these dietary, nutraceutical, or alternative medications. There are studies out there, that's for sure, but none of them are solid that can tell us whether something is working or not. And some of the reasons is because there's either too few patients or participants in the studies, or there was a lack of randomization or placebo control, which we usually do for the medicines that are FDA approved. So my general advice with natural supplements, nutraceuticals, is that consider the source of the evidence. Just because there's evidence doesn't mean that it's gospel truth. Do your due diligence and figure out where the evidence is coming from or the advice is coming from. And of course, talk to your physician if you're not sure. Next. But with that said, I just want to cover some of the more common alternative medications that have been touted to be beneficial for people with Alzheimer's disease. And perhaps the most common one is ginkgo biloba. It is a natural supplement. It's herbal. I can tell you that ginkgo has some antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties, but the evidence for its effectiveness is inconsistent. And we know from multiple studies that it does not prevent cognitive decline or dementia. Also know that it can cause bleeding in certain people, especially those who are taking aspirin or other blood thinners. So just be careful with ginkgo, but the evidence is not so strong for ginkgo. Next. The other common compound that's being touted is coconut oil. So what happens with coconut oil is that supposedly it gives the brain an alternate source of energy. So the main source of energy for the brain is glucose, but coconut oil provides the brain with another source of nutrition. Now, the problem with coconut oil is, again, just like ginkgo, it hasn't been shown to change cognitive performance. And also there is a quite high loss to follow-up, meaning it can cause bloating, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. So in large amount, coconut oil may not be the most tolerable alternative medicine to take. So just be aware of this. Next. And then phytochemicals, this includes the turmeric, curcumin, soy, resveratrol. So these are all phytochemicals. Again, problem with these phytochemicals that the studies are small and inconclusive. But we do know that there hasn't been any very, very strong evidence that they work in either preventing dementia or improving the course of dementia. And there are side effects like nausea, vomiting, and sometimes weight loss. So my message, next slide. So my message for these things is, again, take these with caution, talk to your doctor, and just know that the evidence for any one of these is not very clear. So I would take everything with caution. Management of behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. Next. So unfortunately with dementia, it's not just a forgetfulness. Some of these things can appear, like repetitive questioning, hallucinations, delusions, wandering, refusal to take medications, and bathe. So whenever these appear, this is really quite troublesome. Next. It doesn't appear in every patient, but when they do appear, you need to be prepared as a caregiver specifically. Just know that typically these behaviors are triggered by three things. Patient factors, certainly what's going on in their brains, the disease process itself, or perhaps they are unable to express their needs, unmet needs, or they are having pain, or they're afraid, etc. There's also environmental factors. Are they cold or too hot, or are they are getting not too much light, or not enough structure in their day? And then finally, caregiver factors. And this is the most easy to overlook, because caregivers are heroes, but heroes could sometimes be at fault as well, because sometimes the tone of the voice or the way that the caregiver interacts with the patient, with the person with dementia, can also affect the behavior. So just know that behaviors have multiple causes. Next. So just like anything, talk to your doctor about it. These are just ways to consider patient factors, caregiver factors, and environmental factors. Next. And this triangle that with arrows I like, because whenever a behavior happens, I always ask the patient, I always ask the caregiver, what's going on with the patient? Do they have an unmet need, or is there anything that's making them afraid or acting out a certain way? Then I ask about the environment, what's going on at home? And then finally, how are you, the caregiver, how are you interacting with your loved one? Is it possible that you're the one triggering the behavior? Next. Prognosis and progression of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Next. So this is August D, the person that you see here. This is the first patient diagnosed by Dr. Eloy Alzheimer's to have dementia in Germany many years ago. But the course of Alzheimer's disease is typically divided into mild, moderate, and severe. So mild disease is when you have a short-term memory problem, you may have problem with orientation, a little problem expressing yourself, word finding. And then when it progresses to the moderate stage, you may have difficulty being independent. You may have increased need of care from your caregiver. There might be problem with judgment. And then when you get to the late stage, you can have behavioral problems. You may need full care, and some of the behavioral issues may appear during this. So the typical course of Alzheimer's disease is about 10 years, we say. And that means that some people will progress through this in 5 years. Some people will progress over 15 years. It really depends on overall health and other factors. So, but it's important to realize that dementia and Alzheimer's disease tend to be progressive. So we need to be prepared for when it progresses and start planning ahead of time. Next. Next, lifestyle interventions and brain factors. I think this is the last section that I will be covering. All of us want to maintain a healthy mind and a healthy brain. This is something that we all value. And just know that just like heart disease, like cancer, Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia have their own set of risk and protective factors. So risk factors include having healthy diet, avoiding alcohol, not smoking, diabetes. And in fact, if you look at the age or the lifespan, staying in school and getting as much education as you can, especially in the early years of your life, is super important. In the midlife, it's more controlling risk factors like controlling your blood pressure, controlling your cholesterol level, avoiding obesity. And then also maintaining an active cognitive and social life, constantly challenging yourself and improving all of the activities that associated with a healthy mind to increase brain reserve and hopefully keep memory problems at bay. Next. So this is just another look from a life course standpoint for you have children or grandchildren. It's important to emphasize that at any part of your life, whether you're a child or whether you are a young adult or middle age or late adult, there's things that you can do to improve your brain health. Next. Last thing is the benefits of early diagnosis and research participation. Next. This is just a cartoon looking at all of the therapies that are under development for Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia. We don't have an FDA-approved medication to stop Alzheimer's disease in its track, but it's not because of a lack of trying. There's a lot of molecules and medications that are being subjected to clinical trials in different phases. And we can only get to the target, to the center of this, which is getting a disease-modifying therapy to market if we all participate in the clinical trials. Next. For those of you who are interested in knowing more about our center, you could go to our website, which is listed here. You can follow me on Twitter for those who are interested in knowing more about the latest in dementia. And then finally, you can email us at memory@cshs.org. That's memory@cshs.org for additional information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tan. That was very, very informative. We do have a couple questions and there's still time for you guys to submit questions and I will read them over to Dr. Tan. One question is Alzheimer's disease or any dementia hereditary?
So hereditary is a loaded term because certainly our genes play a factor of whether we get a disease or not, but it's not the only factor. For those patients who get, those people who get early onset dementia, that means people who get their dementia in their 40s, 50s, those tend to have a very strong genetic component. So absolutely talk to a genetic counselor. We have one at Cedars-Sinai, for example, because those risk factors that definitely needs to be discussed is what is the genetic risk, and it varies depending on who in the family got the disease. Those who have late onset, that means onset of Alzheimer's disease at 65 years or older, those tend to be a combination between genetic risk and environmental factors. So those are not necessarily hereditary.
And for families that are engaging maybe more with older adults or just wanting to know kind of what to look out for, what are some of the early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease or dementia? Or what's the difference between normal aging and a progressive kind of memory problem?
Sure. So that's a very common question, and it's a very good one because there is overlap between normal aging and early Alzheimer's disease. So really the difference is the frequency and the severity of the cognitive change or the memory change. So as you get older, you have what we call a delay in information processing. So maybe, for example, if you ask me, what was the last movie you saw? It may take me, a few seconds to figure that out, right? It doesn't mean that I'm having dementia, but it only means that I'm trying to remember. And as you get older, that tends to be slower. You also have less ability to multitask, meaning if you were used to juggling 5 things at the same time, cooking, texting, watching TV, talking to your daughter on the phone, you may not be able to do that as you get older. So those are normal changes associated with aging. But with dementia, really, it becomes more prominent as it progresses, meaning you're forgetting things that are important, like paying the property taxes or difficulty balancing the checkbook. Things that you know and were able to do before and you're not able to do anymore, that is when you can distinguish dementia from benign age-associated memory changes.
I also hear things like being able to use like a washer machine or microwave, things that we kind of use day to day, just really struggling with simple things that you used to do every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's a new thing. Like I've had a lot of patients who were given iPhones for Christmas and they really couldn't figure it out. But that doesn't mean they have dementia. It might be just that they need time to learn it. But if they've been using their iPhones all this time and then suddenly don't know how to dial their grandson's number, then that's a problem.
That's a problem, yeah. Can you talk a little bit again about orientation when talking about early stages of Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, sure. Orientation is your ability to figure out where you are in space and time, essentially. So, time orientation would be knowing, the day of the week, the year, the season, and then visual or visual-spatial orientation is knowing where you are. Like one of the common questions we ask of patients who see us in our center is, what floor of the building are we in? You happen to be in the 6th floor, right? And you went to the elevator, you pressed 6, you went up, you got off the elevator, you should know that we're in the 6th floor. But if you don't know, it may be just because you're not paying attention or other things, but knowing that is important.
And do different brain traumas like falls, surgeries, epilepsy increase chance of dementia or cause dementia?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question. So brain trauma definitely does. If you remember Muhammad Ali, he was subjected to multiple brain traumas. Our NFL football players have head trauma, and that does cause dementia. So having head trauma to the point that you lost consciousness, even when you're young, like as a child or as a young adult, can increase your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease later in life. Now, with with epilepsy, there is some evidence that having epilepsy for a number of years can increase your risk of developing dementia later on. So of course, if you have epilepsy, drop to the floor and hit your head, that definitely can increase your risk, not because of the epilepsy itself, but because of the head trauma.
Mhm. So a question from a care partner: how do you help someone that is in denial about their diagnosis and maybe doesn't want to come in for a diagnosis, doesn't want to take a medication? How can someone help?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. And unfortunately, I actually heard in the panel that one of the caregivers said that, there's no shame in Alzheimer's diagnosis. It's not anything you did or didn't do. It's just, just like any disease, it's something that happens. So I think part of it is helping that person come to terms with the diagnosis. And then the other thing I would recommend is putting down in the diary things that happen, right? So the person who is forgetful is the last person who would remember what they've forgotten. So, but if you write down the things that you've observed, and then have another person, a trusted person or a loved one, come and talk to the person and saying, dad, mom, or husband or wife, these are things that we've observed and we're a little concerned about it. Why don't we see your primary doctor or memory specialist and talk to them about it? I think those are good steps, and it's always good to have another person with you so that they don't feel that you're not making sense. So having a corroborating person will be helpful.
Yeah, and you guys can also call our helpline and talk one-on-one with one of our care counselors who can kind of help explore ways to have those conversations with your loved one, with your family member, and kind of strategize about how to get into the doctor to get to get them to an appointment. Let's see. Any research or information regarding using cannabis for Alzheimer's disease?
Research, yes. Typically, those are given for people who have failed other therapies to control behaviors. We're not involved in that research at Cedars-Sinai, but there are other centers which are. I just can tell you that cannabis, of course, it's legal now in California, in other states. It's something that's worth talking to your health professional if your loved one that you're caring for has behavioral problems. It's always a constant debate whether cannabis have side effects just like any other herbal treatments, but so does our medications that we give for people who have behavioral issues, whether for sleep or agitation or hallucination. So it's really the balance between benefit and risk. There is no medication or treatment that has all benefit and no risk, but that has to be personalized. And cannabis and other treatments, you should talk to your medical professional whether it's the right fit for you.
Yeah, thank you. Next question, Dr. Tan. Excellent presentation. I'm learning so much. Regarding life expectancy, did you say typical is 10 years from diagnosis? Can you say a little bit more, give details about that?
Yeah, the life expectancy issue has been, it's a moving target. Like I said, what is quoted in literature is 10 years, right? 10 years from diagnosis. But these are typically done in specialized memory centers, okay, where people come typically at an earlier stage. Now, if you were to come to the diagnosis when your loved one's already in the moderate stage, it may not be 10 years, right? It could be shorter. So it depends really on when in that course. Remember that graph that I told you? It depends on the life expectancy, really depend on that. But regardless of what stage your loved one is in, the most important message is don't delay. If there are legal issues that you want to sort out, if you wanted to travel, if there are conversations about goals of care that you want to have, your best bet of getting the person to participate in a meaningful way is at the earliest possible time, at the point of diagnosis. So that's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, yeah. So we have a couple more questions, but we have a shout out for you, Dr. Tan from Inez. Good talk. And then the other question here is, the last few years, my husband and I more frequently forget words or names, or perhaps what day we did something. We're in our late 70s and late 60s and early 70s. Should we worry?
So just to clarify, Alicia, is the question just the forgetfulness itself, or
Sounds like
okay,
it.
nothing
Yeah.
else was said right besides forgetfulness? Okay, so the reason I ask is because of a clarifying thing. That forgetfulness could be interpreted in a lot of different ways, right? I sometimes get forgetful, like I forget an appointment because it wasn't put in my calendar, for example. So it depends on context, right? I think people should know that we all forget sometimes. The question is how often and what we forget. I had a patient, for example, who forgot to pick up their grandchild, and they've been doing this, every, I think, Tuesday and Thursday, and they just forgot. So that, I think, is troublesome, right? Because most people have a connection with their grandchildren. So that's something that you would not like, oh, I'm just going to watch TV, But they, for example, might lose track of time and they thought it was a Wednesday, not a Tuesday. So that's not necessarily mean that the person has dementia. But if it comes with other things, that's when it becomes problematic.
Yeah, and something earlier that you said, depending on what else is going on in your life, a move, a death in the family could impact your ability to focus and retain those little day-to-day things.
Yeah, and if you haven't slept very well because you have sleep apnea or, other issues, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, another question here. Why do people with dementia seem to lose or hide valuable things to them? Keys, jewelry.
I think it's not, so that's an interesting question. So the reason is because the short-term memory. So short-term memory allows you to form new memories, right? So if I put my keys, or like if I had a jewelry, I'm going to say, oh, the cleaner is coming tomorrow. I don't want this to be stolen, and therefore I'm going to hide it in the refrigerator.
In a safe place.
In a safe place where no one will think to look for something of value. But then if my short-term memory is imperfect, after I do that, especially if I'm doing other things, I'm talking on the phone, I'm thinking of what to make for lunch, or I'm going to have for lunch, then that memory will be not a good memory. Memory is encoding, storage, and retrieval. So if any of those are defective, meaning the encoding is defective, I will not be able to retrieve that memory. I would not know where I put my jewelry, right? So so that tends to happen. But for hiding, there are some people with dementia who feel that because they are insecure about their memory, that people may take advantage of them, and therefore they try to hide it in things that really is not appropriate. But that can be sort of a double whammy there: the forgetfulness and then the paranoia.
Yeah. All right. So last question. Can you share that email address, the Cedars email address that you shared earlier?
Sure. It's memory@cshs, that's Cedars-Sinai Health System.org. Memory@cshs.org.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tan, for joining us and helping to answer these questions. And as I mentioned before, you guys can visit the Jonah Goldrich Center for Alzheimer's and Memory Disorder website, and Dr. Tan shared that email address. And thank you a lot, Dr. Tan, for joining us.
Thank you, Alicia, for partnership, and Cedars-Sinai is proud to partner with the Alzheimer's Los Angeles in this activity.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, we have reached the end of our program. On behalf of Alzheimer's Los Angeles and our partnered with Cedars-Sinai and Elliot and Marcia Sainer, who have generously sponsored our conference, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. We hope that all the information that was shared with you was insightful and useful, and that you'll be able to, this will make your journey a little less challenging. You can always connect with Alzheimer's Los Angeles by calling our helpline. That information was shared with you in the chat, but you see it here on the slide. That's my email address. You can email me. You can call our helpline, and we are on all these social media platforms, so you can connect with us in whatever way is easiest for you. Before you sign off, we have one last poll and a couple of reminders and announcements. We're always looking to improve all of our programs and services. And so we ask that you please take a minute to complete the survey by clicking on the link that is now being shared with you in the chat. If you're not able to complete this today, that's fine. We're going to be emailing you this link, the survey link, as well as other resources that were shared today or that will be helpful to you in the coming days. Again, thank you all so much for joining. Let's see what the results are from the poll. How will you enjoy the rest of your day? So multiple choice here. Have a relaxing afternoon. That's wonderful. It's the most selected answer. Enjoy lunch with friends or family. That's really nice too. Complete the post-eval for the conference. Thank you so much. That's really helpful to us to help improve our programs and services. And we do read every single one of them and respond to all of your feedback. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. That concludes our program. Thank you.